There are bad horror movies, and then there are the ones that sink so low they hit zero. Rotten Tomatoes doesn't hand out that score lightly. A 0% rating means every critic agreed it was trash. No defenders, no guilty pleasure excuses, just failure. These films don't scare, they don't shock, they don't even entertain, they rot. Watching them is like stepping into a grave someone forgot to close. It's damp, empty, and reeks of wasted potential. You don't get nightmares from them. You just get anger. By the time the third entry in this franchise crawled onto video shelves in 2006, the blood had already drained dry. The original I Know What You Did Last Summer was a glossy teen slasher that at least had an atmosphere. The sequel, while weaker, still clung to the idea of the fisherman killer as an urban legend. But I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer doesn't just run out of steam. It feels embalmed before the first body drops. The setting moves to a nowhere Colorado town, abandoning the coastal identity of the original. A group of kids stage a prank at a carnival, someone dies, and they cover it up. A year later, they start receiving the same ominous messages fans remember. But here's the problem. The film has no connection to the earlier characters, no tether to the past. It's a recycled skeleton wearing a mask that doesn't fit. The fisherman is back, but now he's less a man and more a vague supernatural ghost. That shift kills the little credibility the franchise had left. The deaths are flat. The cast is anonymous, like mannequins filling space. And the pacing? It drags like a corpse across gravel. Watching it, you're not unsettled. You're insulted. It's a movie that leans on the name of its predecessors, but delivers nothing. No suspense, no style, not even camp value. Critics shredded it because there was nothing to defend. It's the definition of horror, stripped of horror. A straight-to-video tombstone marking the death of a once promising series. At first glance, Homecoming looks like it might work. Misha Barton plays a woman obsessed with her old high school flame, and the premise suggests a dangerous love triangle when he returns to town with his new girlfriend. But what plays out isn't a tense thriller. It's a hollow stalker drama that thinks it's misery, but doesn't have the teeth. The problem begins with predictability. Within 10 minutes, you already know every beat. The jealous ex, the new love interest, the inevitable kidnapping, the desperate escape attempt. There's no tension because nothing surprises you. The camera work is flat, the dialogue is recycled from bad cable TV, and Barton delivers a performance that critics called lifeless, even when she's meant to be unhinged. Worse, the film mistakes cruelty for horror. It lingers on scenes of psychological torment, but without craft or atmosphere, it comes across as cheap sadism. It isn't shocking, it's just ugly. By the time the climax limps to the finish line, you don't feel dread. You feel exhausted. Homecoming lands in the list because it has nothing original to offer. It copies the skeleton of better films, but strips away the flesh, leaving only the dry bones of cliché. If horror thrives on the unexpected, then Homecoming is its opposite. A film where you see the shadow coming from a mile away, and by the time it reaches you, you no longer care. The original I Spit on Your Grave, both the infamous 1978 version and the 2010 remake, are controversial, violent revenge stories. People argue about them because they provoke strong reactions, for better or worse. But I Spit on Your Grave, too, is different. It doesn't provoke discussion. It provokes disgust, and not the kind horror fans admire. This sequel tries to expand the revenge formula by following a young American woman lured into a fake modeling job overseas. She's kidnapped, brutalized, and left for dead, only to return and hunt her attackers one by one. On paper, that could have been another grim, survivalist horror tale. But the execution here is pure exploitation without substance. The violence is relentless, but it's hollow. Every scene feels engineered, not for story, not for fear, but for shock value alone. The brutality is so prolonged, it numbs you. Instead of creating righteous anger that fuels her revenge, the film drowns you in misery until the payoff doesn't matter. Even when the protagonist begins her bloody counterattack, there's no satisfaction, just more degradation. Critics agreed the film crossed from horror into something grotesquely mechanical. Where the first remake at least sparked debate about its purpose, this sequel left nothing to argue. It's cruelty on a loop, stripped of artistry, stripped of reason. Watching it feels like being locked in a basement with the lights off and no air left. Rotten Tomatoes didn't have to debate this one. 0 was the only fitting number. Horror has always made room for camp. The first Leprechaun had Warwick Davis snarling one-liners, and while it wasn't exactly terrifying, it leaned into its own absurdity. By the third film, though, even the camp had curdled. Leprechaun 3 dumps the killer leprechaun in Las Vegas, a setting ripe for chaos. Instead, what we get is 90 minutes of bargain bin gore and humor so flat, it lands with a thud every time. The plot is nonsense. A young man pawns a magical statue. The leprechaun comes back to life and chaos follows. Except chaos here means recycled kills, endless shots of slot machines, and Davis delivering one tired rhyme after another. Even by low-budget 90s horror standards, the film feels starved of energy. The gore effects are lazy, the jokes are recycled, and the story meanders like a drunk stumbling down the Vegas Strip. But what really kills Leprechaun 3 is how joyless it is. The series is supposed to be tongue-in-cheek, a carnival ride of bad taste and absurdity. This entry doesn't capture that. It feels like homework. The sparkle of weirdness is gone, leaving only bad makeup, cheap sets, and a monster who long ago stopped being scary or funny. Critics didn't just pan it, they ignored it, as if the film wasn't worth the ink. 0 wasn't harsh, 0 was generous. Some horror movies collapse under ambition, others collapse under laziness. The Disappointments Room manages both. Kate Beckinsale stars as a mother moving into a new house with her family, only to discover a hidden room tied to a dark past. It sounds like classic Gothic horror. But the film plays like a draft that never made it past the editing room. The pacing is a disaster. Scenes drag on with no rhythm, scares arrive without setup, and subplots wander off into nowhere. At times, it feels less like a finished movie and more like fragments stitched together by someone who lost the instructions. Even Beckinsale, usually strong in thrillers, seems stranded. Her character is written as erratic, but the performance comes off confused, as if she doesn't know what film she's in. And the scares? They evaporate. What should be eerie glimpses of a cursed history turn into hollow jump scares with no weight behind them. The disappointment in the title ends up being painfully accurate. The movie isn't just bad, it's lifeless. Critics weren't just unimpressed. They were baffled that something so muddled made it into theaters. This wasn't a bold misstep. It was a ghost without substance, a shadow of what could have been. It doesn't sit among the worst because it's offensive or outrageous. It sits there because it has no pulse. The title alone screams rip-off. Released a week after the Pet Sematary remake, Pet Graveyard is the kind of low-budget scavenger built to trick casual viewers into clicking rent. But this isn't just cheap imitation. It's an insult carved out of cardboard. The story follows a group of young adults who experiment with astral projection. They cross over into the afterlife, but when they come back, the Grim Reaper follows them. On paper, it could have worked. Death stalking the living is an old but effective concept. The problem is, nothing about it feels alive. The acting is wooden, as if the cast were dragged in off the street and handed lines minutes before the camera rolled. The direction has no pulse. Flat shots, lifeless pacing, zero atmosphere. The Reaper itself should have been the highlight. Instead, it's a cloaked figure that looks like it was borrowed from a Halloween store clearance rack. Every scare lands with a hollow thud. You never feel dread. You feel bored wearing a mask. Critics didn't even bother tearing it apart in detail. They dismissed it as pure filler, a knockoff built to catch people searching for Stephen King. Pet Graveyard doesn't even fail with style. It's a ghost made of paper, floating for 90 minutes before dissolving into nothing. Remakes are often doomed, but none collapse as hard as One Missed Call, 2008. The Japanese original, directed by Takashi Miike, was strange and eerie, if uneven. Hollywood stripped away every ounce of its style and left behind one of the most hated horror films of the 2000s. The premise should have been chilling. People receive voicemails from their future selves, each message predicting their death. Instead of dread, this remake delivers flat kills, zero atmosphere, and soap opera drama shot like a CW pilot. Every scare is telegraphed so far in advance, you're already numb when it arrives. Shannon Sussman leads a cast that seems trapped in quicksand. While the CGI looks laughable, gaping mouths stretched into cartoon screensavers, graphics already dated the year it came out. Critics shredded it as cheap and soulless. Roger Ebert dismissed it with one word: dumb. The final insult, a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes and an F from CinemaScore. Not many films earn both. One Missed Call didn't just fail, it was buried alive. Few horror films self-destruct as spectacularly as the Cabin Fever remake. The original, Eli Roth's 2002 debut, wasn't universally loved, but it had energy. It was a nasty little contagion flick that reveled in gore and black comedy. 14 years later, someone thought remaking it shot for shot with no changes was a good idea. They were wrong. This 2016 version takes Roth's script and replays it almost line for line. Except everything that gave the original its crude charm is gone. The cast is forgettable, the timing is dead, and the gore effects, the one thing a body horror film must deliver, look like second-rate cosplay makeup. Watching it is like seeing a cover band butcher a song you already half-liked. Even Roth himself distanced from it, and fans turned on it instantly. Critics didn't just dislike it, they wondered why it existed at all. Horror thrives on surprise, on atmosphere, on some sense of necessity. This remake offers none. It's the cinematic equivalent of eating cold leftovers of a meal you didn't enjoy the first time. 0% isn't just deserved here, it's poetic. Cabin Fever, 2016, proves that horror without vision is worse than horror without budget. You can forgive cheap. You can't forgive pointless. Slashers ruled the 80s, and for every classic like Halloween or A Nightmare on Elm Street, there were dozens of knockoffs. Sorority House Massacre wasn't just another knockoff. It was a Xerox so faint you could barely see the outline. The film follows a group of sorority sisters stalked by an escaped killer. That's it. No twist, no fresh angle, no atmosphere. Even the kills are lifted wholesale from Halloween. The stalking shots, the silent masked figure, the predictable setups. It's as if the filmmakers studied Carpenter's masterpiece and then tried to reproduce it with half the budget and none of the talent. What makes it worse is how bland it feels. Some 80s slashers are bad but fun, dripping with neon excess or outrageous gore. Sorority House Massacre offers no such charm. The performances are wooden, the scares flat, the pacing leaden. Even its attempts at dream sequences and psychic connections meant to add flavor collapse into nonsense. Critics didn't just dismiss it. They ignored it into obscurity. It wasn't shocking enough to be hated, not wild enough to be remembered, and not stylish enough to survive as camp. That's the cruelest fate for a slasher, to be forgotten. The film's failure was inevitable because there was nothing there to defend. Just echoes of better films that deserved better treatment. South African deserts. A creature made of bones. It sounds like the setup for something original, maybe even unnerving. But The Bone Snatcher wastes every inch of its potential. What should have been a strange, atmospheric monster movie collapses into confusion, boredom, and cheap visuals that turn dread into laughter. The plot follows a group of miners and scientists investigating disappearances in the desert. They encounter a monster formed from the skeletons of its victims. A chilling idea on paper. In practice, the creature looks like a pile of sticks glued together and moved by puppetry that might embarrass a high school play. Every appearance drains tension instead of raising it. The pacing is a desert in itself. Long stretches of nothing, interrupted by characters delivering dialogue so stilted you'd think they were reading manuals. The setting could have been a strength, but instead of vast, eerie isolation, it feels like a travel commercial gone wrong. What kills it most is the atmosphere, or rather, the lack of it. Horror thrives on shadows, silence, unease. The Bone Snatcher is drenched in daylight, stripping away any mystery. You see the monster too clearly, too often, and it never frightens you. By the end, you don't fear it. You pity it. Critics dismissed it as a waste of premise, a film that teased originality only to collapse into mediocrity. The idea of a skeletal predator in the desert deserved better. Instead, it became bones scattered across the sand, forgotten by everyone. Thanks for watching this rundown of every 0% horror movie. If you enjoyed the ride through cinema's scariest flops, hit like, subscribe for more quick movie explainers, and drop a comment. Which terrible horror film do you think actually deserved better?